Module 1, Contemporary Philippine Arts from the Region. At the end of this module, students are expected to describe various contemporary art forms and their practices from the various regions, and discuss various art forms found in the Philippines. Have you ever wondered what art is? Is it only about paintings and sculptures found in museums? How about the jingles we hear in commercials? Or the decorations in our food? Are those considered art? So in this picture, we could see the derivation of the word art. Art is a tool for communication. Whether it is a painting or a performance, as long as it's a venue for one to convey or express thoughts, emotions, or aspirations, it is considered art. Every artwork reflects the artist and his or her society. Art offers us the chance to learn and understand artists and the regions where they belong through their artworks. Art is defined as the manifestation or use of the various creative disciplines. It is produced by human creativity and skill to express oneself. It comes in many forms or disciplines such as literature and media arts, but the most familiar of which is the visual and performing arts. Have you ever wondered how the Philippine art developed? Do you know that there are significant differences in the art forms and art making based on the period the artworks were produced? The traditional art of the Philippines developed as different factors influenced the art making in the country. The Philippine art has its unique characteristics based on its period and development. So let's talk about the arts through the ages. So during the Greek period, they are more on technique. Roman period is about skill. Christian period is about craftsmanship. Renaissance period about genius and design. Modern period about fine arts. Romantic period about self-expression. And lastly is the contemporary period, which talks about new art forms. Moving on with the timeline of Philippine arts. Art is one of the earliest and most basic forms of communication. This is seen in the prehistoric visual artworks like the cave drawings and other early artifacts. This is also evident in our folk songs and rituals. The visual and performing arts are ways for people to express themselves and share their individual insights to others. Through this art, they catch other people's attention, imagination, and admiration. In pre-colonial Philippines, arts are for ritual purposes or for everyday use. Islamic art is characterized by geometric designs and patterns eliciting focus from the believers. Art became a handmaiden of religion, serving to propagate Catholic faith and thus support the colonial order at the same time. In the American regime, commercial and advertising arts were integrated into fine arts curriculum. Moreover, America favors idyllic sceneries and secular forms. Since the Japanese advocated for the culture of East Asia, preference was given to indigenous art and traditions of the Philippines. This emphasized their propaganda of Asia belonging to Asians. Modern era in the Philippine art began in World War II and the granting of independence. That's why writers and artists pose the question of national identity as the main theme of the various art forms. And lastly, the Philippine contemporary art was an offshoot of social realism brought by martial law. Arts became expression of people's aspirations for a just, free, and sovereign society. The development in Philippine art comes in three major traditions. These are the ethnic tradition, Spanish colonial tradition, and the American colonial and contemporary traditions. So let's talk about first the ethnic tradition. Ethnic tradition is also called as indigenous art. The ethnic art forms are primarily influenced by the geographical location and the experiences of the Filipinos. The dances in the country during the pre-colonial times vary depending on the area where our ancestors thrived. In the highlands, dance steps were imitations of the movements of certain animals like birds, while the choreography of the Filipinos near the sea were mimics of the movements of the fish. In terms of visual arts, pottery, weaving, wood carving, and metal crafting were dominant in making use of available materials surrounding them during that time. In architecture, the early Filipinos used local materials such as anahaw, bamboo, coton, cane, rattan, and other light materials in constructing structures. The folk literature verbalized our ancestors' experiences, which came in forms of folk speeches, songs, and narratives. While in terms of theater arts, tribal presentations and rituals were the early theatrical performances depicting their beliefs. And lastly, in music, our ancestors also have their indigenous musical instruments like the bamboo flutes and brass gongs. Moving on to the next is the Spanish colonial tradition. Religion and secularization greatly influenced the arts in the Philippines under the Spanish regime. The friars were the ones supervising the practice of arts in the country with their agenda of propagating Christianity and maintaining the power of the colonizers. In the field of literature, the literary works could be classified into religious and secular prose and poetry. In the area of theater arts, secular and religious plays like the commedia became popular. In choreography, religious dances commonly performed to venerate patrons and saints proliferated. There were also secular dances performed in social functions like the valse, fandango, polka, minuet, and among others. In music, the Spaniards introduced the piano and other Western instruments. Even bands and orchestra multiplied as the zarzuelas and operas became prevalent. And visual arts, Spanish introduced the painting and sculpture, which mostly depicted religious subject matters. In architecture, stones and bricks were predominantly used in constructing buildings like churches, houses, and government offices. Western Spanish influence was evident in architecture. The exterior and interior of the buildings were embellished with wood carvings or metal works with intricate decorative designs. However, despite the strong influence of the Spaniards, the arts in the country did not result in a pure Western art, but a mixture of Western and indigenous art. Remember that Filipino artists still put Filipino touches on their art pieces. And finally, the American colonial and contemporary traditions. The American brought about many changes in the politics, economy, education, and culture of the Philippines. In fact, in the area of education, there are Filipinos who went abroad to study. Some studied under the tutelage of American educators, and some learned through observation and personal experiences. So for those who went abroad to study, came back to country carrying the concept of modern art, this arises the modern art. So when we say modern art, it refers to the practice of art in the 1860s to 1960s. In addition, it was during these years, the Western world was significantly also developing. Moreover, the urbanization, consumerism, rise of the middle class, change in political system, secularizations, and the emergence of new technology affected the way of art making in that period. So, due to the technological innovations, the experimental approaches in developing art rose above traditional art practices and methodologies. So, new norms of expression came which were evident in nature. Even the modern art continuously develops even after World War II, which led to the contemporary way of art making today. So when we say contemporary art, it refers to the recent and current practice of art ranging from the 1970s up to present. It also mirrors the society and culture of the present times. And lastly, it uses combination of different methods, materials, and ideas that transcend the traditional way of art making. But remember that in all Philippine art forms had a different twist as the American way of life became part of the lives of the Filipinos. The art forms and art practices in the country also broadened. So as a result, artists experimented with different materials and methodologies and produced non-conventional artworks with a wide range of themes. Can you now distinguish the differences between the different art traditions? Do you already know what contemporary art is?